How's it going, everybody? I'm Jay Ray. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Jay Ray's DIY. In this video, I'm going to be discussing why I got all these hoses everywhere in my shop. The answer is these hoses are for dust collection. In my shop, most of the dust collection needs that I have are within this 10 foot by 10 foot area where I've got my miter saw, my planer, my router table, joiner, of course my drill press, and my table saw. We're all combined within this area. And I needed some dust collection to go into them. I did put out a video a little while back discussing a Harbor Freight dust collector that I bought and how I assembled it. I've made some changes since that original video, and I want to discuss that in this video and also talk about how I've got my dust collection set up currently and how it's working for me. So I mess up all the time while recording these videos. If you're enjoying it, please stick around to the end. You can see the bloopers that I've got going on in this video. I always try to include the bloopers at the end of my videos. Hopefully you'll get some entertainment out of them. So I'd like to start with talking about the dust collection I've got on my miter saw. I know it may look like something out of a science fiction movie with all these hoses going everywhere, but I'll explain what they are here in detail. So I've got a 4-inch hose coming from my dust collector. Got a blast gate right here so I can shut off the flow to the miter saw or open it up. And then I've got a box that I've made out of some scrap plywood on the back here, and with another 4-inch hose coming up to a box that I've made that's underneath this miter saw. So when you let the saw up, you can kind of see what I've got here. I've got a few scrap pieces that I put together with a rounded back on it right here. This rounded back follows the curve of the back of my miter saw. And I've actually got that bolted in place with 3 screws that hold it in place. I've got this box supported with just a scrap piece of wood coming from this front box here to the back box there. That way that back box doesn't droop and pull this up too much. I actually initially started with building this little box above the blade. I've got a piece of wood that goes behind the blade and a couple pieces on the side here. I've actually built a little ramp up to these hoses that I've got coming out the top. And I had 3 hoses initially coming out the top of this, but one of them that I had, it was a different type of piping. These are some shop vac hoses that are like 1 inch and 3/8 diameter. The other one that I had was just a cheap hose that I got from Harbor Freight with a submersible pump that I'm using in a pond in my backyard right now. So that other hose, it was really rigid and it kind of sounded like one of those flexi straws that kids blow through and it causes whistling sounds. Since I didn't want to listen to whistling noises going through that third pipe there, I ended up taking it out and I just put some duct tape over the holes that were in this box and this box over here that's by the blade. So the way I've got this configured right now with this lower box on here, it's really only good for making straight cuts or 90-degree cuts on this miter saw. If I was trying to make a 45 or 60-degree cut with this, I would end up having to take this lower box off in order to use the miter saw to make that cut. So I built this table in another video. It's got my router table, my planer, and my joiner on this one table. And since then I've added my drill press on it as well. But for dust collection, what I've done is I've built this box here. It's a 6-inch by 6-inch pieces of plywood that I used here to create this box. I made some wooden blast gates. This one right here, for example, opens up the flow to the joiner. This hose right here is a 2.5-inch hose. It's actually from my shop vac. Unfortunately, my shop vac died, so I had to find a way to use this hose with my sander. This hose fits my RO sander perfectly, so I wanted to utilize it in the system. So I drilled a 2.5-inch hole in this box. I can take this out, and I've just made simply the disc that I drilled out and a 4-inch disc, and I can set them on here, and that'll cut off flow to this area right here, so this hose can be removed. This 4-inch hose right here goes to my planer, and I've made a blast gate below here. Of course, it can be pulled all the way out, but I've got a line that I've drawn on this that shows where the edge of the hose is. So if I pull it out just to that line, then that opens this up perfectly so that I can get sawdust out of my planer when I'm using it. If I close that, this other one I've got down here is a little bit different design. I slide this out, but it's a similar effect. I've got a line that I've drawn on here to show how far to open it, and this goes to my router table. Now on my router, I've done something different than what most people have done. I know a lot of people build cabinets for the router to go in. They've got a door on the front and it's totally enclosing their router. And if you enclose the router, a lot of times what's happening is that dust that's going into your router cabinet could be drawn into your router, and that could cause your router to fail prematurely. I didn't want to cause issues with my router, so I've done something differently, and I'm going to show that to you right here. This is a view underneath my router table. I'm using this Bosch router. I really like Bosch routers. I think they do pretty good. This one has both the 1/2 inch and the 1/4 inch collet that you can use, which is part of the reason that I like it. But what I wanted to show you was the dust collection. So the dust will go through that open port on the back of the router, and then it goes through this custom box that I made on the side here, and back to a 4-inch flex hose, and then to that box that I made on the back. That box on the back also has that blast gate that I showed you previously. So I'm not sure if you can see it on the video, but this box coming off the back of the router is slightly tapered, going back to that 4-inch pipe, because the router is not quite as wide as what that 4-inch is. So end up having to taper our box a little bit, but I think it's working out pretty well for my needs. Kind of taking this apart a little bit so you can see on the back of my router table fence, there's like a 2.5 inch pipe that comes out, and on top of that box that I just showed you underneath the table, I cut an opening where the fence will extend back as far as it goes. I made it round by drilling a hole with a hole saw, and then I cut some slots that enables this pipe to slide forward and backwards with the fence when I move it to make different cuts on the router table. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the dust collection that I've got on the router table, the way it is set up. The only issue is every once in a while when I'm routing a board, it'll throw some little chips out to the right. It's not a huge deal because I just take that 2.5 inch pipe that's right there and then just vacuum them up real quick. So I've got a Porter cable benchtop planer here that I'm using. It's a 12.5 inch planer, and I end up having to make this custom box on the back of it in order to hook up a 4-inch dust collection hose to it. What this came with was just a little shroud, and it would just throw dust everywhere, and all the chips will be all over the floor. Dust will be in the air, dust will be in front of it and behind it. This helps considerably in the dust collection that I've got here, but I do have to vacuum up a few chips and stuff that come out the front still, and a little bit out the back, but it's not anywhere near what it used to be without the dust collection. So moving on, I've got this hose that comes out the bottom of the box I made on my little work table there with my joiner, planer, and router table on it. And this hose comes down to a Y that also connects with a flex hose that goes to my table saw. Now under my table saw, I've got a blast gate. You can open and close right here. So beyond my table saw, that Y that's underneath it, the hose, flexible hose, runs to my dust collector, which is behind this curtain. I just use a moving blanket here for a curtain because I had it, and they're cheap. You can get them at Harbor Freight for $5 to $10. You might ask why I've actually got this curtain up here. There's a couple reasons. One, it reduces sound in my shop, reduces the echo when I'm trying to record these videos, and for two, we like to play darts. Now let's be honest, every once in a while when you're playing darts, someone will miss. when someone misses the dartboard, it will go into the wall that's behind the dartboard. And we're trying to minimize the amount of holes that we put in the wall behind the dartboard. So put this blanket up here to catch the darts, and also to keep them from getting lost behind the dust collector or the trash can that I've got sitting next to the dust collector. So I've got these two hoses coming in from my miter saw and my table saw, and they're joining up in this Y connector. This Y connector is going into a 5-gallon bucket. Now this 5-gallon bucket is actually a cyclone separator that I've made with a thine baffle in the bottom of it. And that is mounted to a trash can, and the Harbor Freight dust collector blower motor is sitting on top of that. Okay, so right here you can see one of my most recent updates to this Harbor Freight dust collector. What I did was I took off the intake port by unbolting it, and I used a piece of 1/4-inch plywood and made my own intake using a 6-inch HVAC duct coming into this piece of plywood, and I ran a 6-inch piece of pipe all the way down this bucket to about this area right here. And the thine baffle that I've got inside here is actually mounted to the bottom of the bucket, which is just below this metal sitting inside this trash can lid. So as you can see, the intake is towards the top of the bucket now, and then the pipe that I've got would be coming in right about here for the outlet. That way I can get some better separation because the inlet is higher than the outlet pipe, so that'll cause a circling motion around the outside of the bucket. And then with the thine baffle down here, most of the large chips and everything are going to go down into the trash can, and only really fine dust will make it to the bag that came with the Harbor Freight dust collector. So for comparison, this is the 6-inch that I've recently upgraded to, and this is the original intake that was on the Harbor Freight manifold. Just holding it up next to each other here so you can get an idea how much difference there is between a 6-inch and the 4-inch intake that originally came with the Harbor Freight manifold. So you might ask why I changed the inlet on my Harbor Freight dust collector from a 4-inch to a 6-inch inlet on it. It's pretty simple. I'm trying to increase the CFM on my system and get better dust collection at my tools. I'm always looking for ways to improve the dust collection in my shop. Now, my dust collector is a 1-horsepower Harbor Freight dust collector. It's rated at 660 CFM. Now, I did see a couple videos on YouTube from some other people. One of them was Steel Blade Woodworks, and the other one was Wacky Works Woodworks. They both had anemometers and actually were able to measure their airflows. I do not have an anemometer, so I don't know the CFM of my system. I know what my 1-horsepower Harbor Freight dust collector is rated at is 660 CFM, which if I could get that at my tools would be pretty decent, although from reading Bill Pence's website, he suggests we need at least 1,000 CFM at 4,000 feet per minute to get the fine dust extraction that we want to protect our lungs and keep our family and ourselves healthy while working in our wood shops. But what these guys found was they were getting between 700 to 800 CFM with the 5-inch intake and some flexible hose on their units. Once they upgraded that to a 6-inch, they were getting between 1100 and 1200 to 1250 CFM. So they were almost getting the factory rating on their units by upgrading to 6-inch. So I figured it's worth a try. Initially what I did, I had this unit mounted on the wall. So I took off the flange that has the 4-inch inlet on it. I was wearing long sleeves at the time. I turned the motor on and I just stuck my sleeve a few inches below the motor, and it was trying to pull my sleeve up into the motor. So I believe that with a larger opening, you're going to get more airflow. And I did take amp readings on it today. I am an electrician. I've got a Fluke amp clamp that I was using. And this motor that I've got is rated at 5.1 amps from Harbor Freight with the 4-inch inlet on it. When I'm running through a 2.5 inch pipe, I'm pulling about 6.9 amps with this 6-inch diameter inlet going to the Harbor Freight motor here. Now when I run a 4-inch pipe open, I am pulling about 6.5 amps. And I did take the bag off and see what the amperage was pulling on there, just to see if there was restriction on the outlet that could cause the amperage to go up or down. And I was still reading about 6.5 to 6.6 amps, even with that filter bag off of there, just blowing the clean air through the shop with a 4-inch port open on 2 machines. So I wasn't able to decrease the amperage any lower than 6.5 amps, and the most I was getting was with only a 2.5 inch port open with 6.9 amps. So I don't believe I'm harming this motor in any way by doing this upgrade from the 4-inch inlet to the 6-inch inlet. But to be fair and honest, I did not take amp readings on this before I changed out from the 4-inch to the 6-inch inlet on this, so I don't know for a fact whether or not I actually increased the amperage on this motor simply by changing out that inlet. Even though this motor is rated at 5.1 amps from Harbor Freight, that doesn't necessarily mean that it actually draws 5.1 amps when you're using it in real life. So I can tell you that while I'm running my dust collection system, and if I'm standing right here, which is where most of my work occurs, obviously because this is where my workbench is, the dust collector only runs around 62 to 63 decibels at the max, so it's a pretty quiet system. Actually, 60 decibels is about the average conversation level, or maybe a little bit lower. So I can stand here, have a conversation with somebody while the dust collector is running, and it's not an issue. When I walk up to the dust collector itself and go behind the curtain there, it might get as loud as 70, maybe 72 decibels. So I just want to tell you guys that I have worked around construction a lot of my life, and I know that OSHA has a requirement where if you're around a noisy environment, which they consider to be an 8-hour time-weighted average of 85 decibels or more, then you're required to have hearing protection at all times when you're in the shop. So from what I've researched online and other videos that I've seen and stuff that I've thought about, I believe there's ways that I can improve this system. One of them that I would like to try would be to increase everything from 4-inch to 6-inch ductwork and get rid of the majority of the flex pipe and run hard pipe for a lot of the system out here. But overall, this system works pretty well for me, and I've only got about 32 foot total of flex pipe. I've got about 12 foot going from the white connection on the separator to the miter saw, and the other 20 foot goes from the white connection to this box that goes to multiple machines, and then I get about 4.5 feet going to my planer. So I don't believe that I've been real excessive in my use of flex pipe. However, I do believe that there could be some improvements made to this system. Hopefully you've got something out of this video, and if not, maybe you enjoyed the entertainment value of it, or you might enjoy the entertainment value out of these bloopers coming up next. This has worked out pretty well for me. It's been, which is behind the stairs here. We don't like a whole. I did take a reading with a S. I don't know if it's a because about 80-90% of the factory rating on that horsepower. Not horsepower.